Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Hi everybody, I'm Dallas and I'm an addict. Dallas. And let's just start with my name. I was born in Denver and I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and I'm a junior. So my name is Dallas Woodrow Taylor. And growing up in San Antonio with a name like Dallas got me in a lot of trouble. Let's just say I got in a lot of fights as a kid, and you know, I don't think a day went by that I didn't get in some kind of a altercation with another human being. And you know, looking back on my life, I had a lot of excuses to be as angry as I was. My saving grace was that I loved music, you know. And I remember my mom took me to the movies when I was 12 years old. Actually, I was 11 years old. And I saw a movie called The Gene Krupa Story. And, you know, I just knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to play the drums, and I wanted to be like him. Little did I know, if anybody had seen the story, was I going to be just like him. Just not quite as famous. And so, you know, my mom she knew what she wanted. She knew what she wanted from me. You know, my father was an airline pilot. He had left the house, when I was 3 or 4, and you know, I lived with my mom, and we lived with my grandparents. And I just remember depression and sadness in my home. You know, old people dying. My mom was a miserable human being. She just couldn't be happy. She couldn't find happiness, so she decided to find happiness through me. So looking back, I know she kind of had this all calculated, you know, because she wanted me to be something. You know, I'm half Spanish. My mother is Spanish, and my father is Scotch-Irish. And I think growing up in San Antonio, there was a lot of prejudice. And my mother was determined that I was going to grow up to be a white kid. So I really think she married a Taylor just to, I really feel this. And I felt from as far back as I can remember shame about who I was. I remember my grandmother tried to teach me Spanish. And my mother had a fit. She wouldn't let her teach me any Spanish. She said, no. He's going to speak English. And you know, I carried that shame my whole life, you know, and you know, all through my childhood, I felt different then. But when I got my first set of drums, and I worked for those drums. I worked for my mother's boyfriend was a crop duster, and I used to load God knows what in his crop duster all summer long. You know, probably where my drug addiction started, come to think of it. And at the end of the summer, he handed me 2 $100 bills, and I went out and I bought these drums. And I want you to know that I went at music and playing the drums like I went at shooting dope. I did it every single day, every waking minute that I could, you know. And I don't know how my grandparents and my mother took it. you know. I would go to school begrudgingly. I would get through school. Mostly I'd sleep through school. I'd get home and I'd go right to my bedroom and I'd lock myself up in the room and I'd obsessively play the drums. You know, it was my sanity, because I had an acute awareness of what was going on around me, and it was just such overwhelming sadness and despair in my home. And, you know, sure enough, I remember, you know, I guess I was 13 at the time. My grandmother came in and woke me up, and she said, "Come in and see what's wrong with your mom. There's something wrong with your mother." And I walked into to her bedroom, and it looked like she was asleep, and I touched her face, and she was cold. You know, and it turned out that my mother died in her sleep at the age of 47 from heart failure. Did she die of depression? Did she die of alcoholism? I don't know. You know, I don't know. She just gave up. And that's when the rage set in. And that's when I decided, you know, fuck the world. I'm gonna hurt anybody and everybody that gets in my way. And especially fuck God. So, you know, thank God I had my music. You know, my mother used to travel with me on the road. I played in a band, and you know, I was the kid in the band. In fact, I couldn't get in a bar. She had to go with me so I could play in these, you know, and there were so many Army and Air Force bases in Texas, and I must have played in every one of them, but I couldn't go in there by myself. So my mom would sit at the bar, you know, and all these guys would be hitting on her because she was, you know, spectacular looking. And she, you know, raised her little rock star, you know. And, you know, that was the beginning of the end for me. Now, you know, I knew that I had alcoholism in my family. I knew I had an uncle. My grandfather was a San Antonio police detective. He died of kidney failure. My oldest uncle was a motorcycle cop. He died of liver cirrhosis, and the youngest uncle died in jail from a concussion from a drunk driving accident. So, you know, it's like riddled with it. So I had a sense all my life that I needed to stay away from alcohol, and I hated alcohol. I thought people that drank alcohol were square. I thought that they were like sloppy, and you know, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because I want to go back to when I was 5 years old. I want you to know that I love opiates. It's I have to be honest because Tony brought me here. It's part of my DNA. And this is how I know this. At the age of 5 years old, I had stomach ulcers. That's give you a little idea what my childhood was like. And I always had stomach aches. Probably before I had to go to school. I wasn't sure about what that was about. But my mother chased me around the room. She had this medicine that she had gotten from the doctor. And I remember it smelled terrible. So I actually ran away from her. She chased me around the room. I'll never, you know, I'd forgotten about this till I got clean. And she chased me around the room, finally cornered me and shoved that spoon in my mouth, and I gagged it down. And it was the most god-awful stuff I'd ever tasted. And I swear to God, 5 minutes later, I went back to her and said, "Mom, I feel normal for the first time in my life. Why don't I feel like this all the time? Can I have some more?" She got a horrified look on her face, and I'll never forget this, and put that stuff away. And I remember bugging her for 3 days to try to get some more of that. You know, and I'd forgotten about that little incident. And it wasn't until, you know, the cloud lifted and some of the fog lifted that I was able to remember it. So, okay, I'm 13. My mom dies. I had an older sister. She's 13 years older than me. You know, my father and I got along great till he found out I wanted to be a musician, because his dream for me was to grow up and be an airline pilot like him. And, you know, he was crazy as a loon. My father flew the hump in World War II, and I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but that was a China-Burma run. They flew in C-47s unarmed, and they were flying targets. Virtually everybody tried to shoot them down because they were the ones that were carrying all the supplies, and only the crazy people took that assignment. See, I'm starting to put two and two together here. And so, you know, my father's dream for me was to grow up and be a pilot like him. He flew in air shows, you know, he was a famous pilot in his circle. And, you know, when he found out that I decided to be a musician, it was all over, you know. He was gone. He didn't physically really shut me out of his life, but I knew that he just felt differently about me. And, you know, it's just amazing how that stuff works. So, you know, I ended up living with my sister because my father just couldn't handle me after my mom died. And so I was perfectly okay with that, because that meant I could do whatever the hell I wanted. And it was right about then that I met a bass player named Billy Barker. And Billy he used to have weed that came in the Prince Albert can. And it was like, you know, all seedy and stemmy, and you know, you'd smoke it and you'd get a headache. And but I found my magic potion. You know, I loved, you know, I'm a cartoon watcher, and I watch cartoons. And as far as I grew up with cartoons, and as far as I'm concerned, when I smoked that joint, it was like I'm hanging with bugs, man. You know, we used to have a saying: "There's no hope without dope," and that's how I honest to God believe it. And you know what? I don't know if I regret it or not. You know, I think it was what it was. You know, I think at that time it kept me from killing myself or somebody else. But I ended up, of course, leaving my sister's house and playing, and I made a good living at 16, 15 and 16, playing in Phoenix. We were in Phoenix, Arizona at the time, and I was playing in bars in Skid Row. And I remember my poor father would come and try to drag me out in his captain's uniform, you know, and they wouldn't let him in the club, and there's these big dudes standing there, you're getting in there, and you know, my poor dad he just didn't know what to do with me, and you know, I just you know, feel bad about that for him, because I know how much he loved me. And you know, I was living in an apartment. We always had drugs, and I'm the kind of dope fiend that you'll hand me something, I'll take it, and then I'll ask you what it was. And my buddy Billy Barker brought this stuff to me called Asthmador. Now, I don't know if anybody knows Asthmador. Now, it says very clearly on the can, with a skull and crossbones, poison, do not take internally. And Billy said, I love Billy. Billy said, if you take 2 big tablespoons of this, you'll hallucinate. And I said, cool. And And I took that stuff, and boy, man, they told me that I tried to build a bonfire in our living room, that I was smoking a French fry, and I was talking to people that weren't there. It's belladonna. So, and I actually did it again. I did it again, and that's the insanity of, I just wanted to be out of my body. I just wanted to be anywhere and anybody but me. I had such self-loathing, and such fear. I remember even as a little kid, I've always been obsessed with death. It was either the fear of death or wishing I could die. And I remember coming to every morning or going to bed, God, please just take me in my sleep. Please just let me die. I can't live anymore. And so I met this girl, and she got pregnant, and the day before my 16th birthday, we got married. And 2 weeks later, I was driving in my car, and I heard on the radio that my father was killed in a plane crash, and at an air show in front of like 50,000 people. And that was the second level of click for me. It was like, oh, okay, I'll show you, motherfucker. That's where I really thought God was out to get me. And so I was devastated because I never got to get to apologize or make amends to my father, because I loved him dearly, And so as you can see, I needed a fix. I needed a fix. I worked my way out to Los Angeles. I dumped my wife at her mother's house in Whittier, and I hung out on Hollywood Boulevard. And I put this band together with my buddy, and it was a band called Clear Light. We called it Clear Light because it was the name of an acid that was going around at the time. And so, we got signed. I'm 18 years old. I got signed my first record deal by Paul Rothschild, who had just signed the Doors. He had just gotten out of prison for dealing pot. And he reminded me of this little leprechaun. He always wore green, and he wore a green hat, and he had red hair. He looked like a little leprechaun, but he was Jewish. And that's where it started for me. I started to get sort of well known, and I started to, we played in New York, and I started to get stopped on the street, and people knew who I was. I started getting a reputation, and we put out a couple records. They did okay. They didn't, obviously didn't do as good as the Doors, but we had a little underground following. And then, obviously the band broke up, and this guy, John Sebastian, discovered me, and I was playing, and I'm smoking pot, and I'm doing okay. I'm, once in a while I'll drop a little acid. Life is good. It's great. I'm playing music. I'm dealing with, I'm high all the time and so I'm not feeling any pain. I'm not feeling really noticing any self-loathing. And, I'm doing good, and I'm still playing those drums like I'm killing somebody, And I think that's really, what would have happened had I not had my drums. And this guy, John Sebastian, asked me to play on his record, and then I met Stephen Stills, and then I met David Crosby, and I met Graham Nash, and we formed Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And we made this great record. And I remember at the time, I was a high-functioning pot smoker. And then somebody came up to me and put this spoon up under my nose, and He said, here, try this. And I did that Woody Allen deal. I blew it off his spoon. And he said, no, you breathe. And he showed me how, and I breathed it in. And I remember, I'm sitting at my drums, by the way, between recording takes. And I breathed it in, and all of a sudden my throat closed up, and I couldn't breathe. And I thought, oh, my God, I can't breathe. And can I have some more? I was a crazy, to-the-curb, hope-to-die dope fiend. And I did cocaine because I could. And I bought ounces because I could. I had a Ferrari, I had ounces of dope, and on a daily basis, I had a 38 in my mouth. And I just never could bring myself to pull that trigger. And I remember making little attempts at suicide. I remember doing, my grandmother, when she found out I was going to be a musician, she said in a Spanish accent, oh my God, you're going to grow up and be a junkie. And I said, no, Grandma, that's jazz musicians. I'm going to be a rock and roll. So I'll be goddamned if I didn't find myself being fired from Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Now, if you know anything about that band, that's hard to do. Because of my drug use, Boy, was that confusing to me. And I woke up one day and I didn't have any veins left. And I was a terrible junkie. I was I saw a drugstore cowboy. That was a cool junkie, man. That guy could take care of himself, I was constantly getting sick. I was constantly running out of dope and money. I had no knowledge. I was, just a 24-year-old punk kid. I didn't even know you could take some codeine and take the edge off. So I'd kick and I'd shake. And, finally I surrendered to the methadone program. I surrendered to the methadone program in 1974, and I stayed on methadone till 1984. And I'll get to what happened now. Fast forward, I had sold the drums I played on the first CSN album, Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, Marrakesh Express, Long Time Gone, for $50 worth of heroin. And I just wanted to get well. And I took that heroin, and I couldn't make it home. And I stopped at a gas station in Hollywood, and I went into the men's room, and the fucking faucet was broken. I went into the stall. It didn't have a back on it. I took the syringe, and I put it in the bowl, and I drew it up. And it made sense to me. Well, I'm going to cook it anyway. I'm going to take out the impurities. And I shot that stuff in my arm. And I started to think maybe I had a problem. Man, oh man. Finally, I'd been homeless. I'd been in and out. I remember carrying my gold and platinum records around with me without any place to sleep. I remember giving my gold and platinum records to dealers and them, and then get them just feeling sorry for me and giving them back to me. And so around Thanksgiving of 1984, I'm then married to my third wife, who I'd met in a bar. And Trudy, she was a sweet girl. Trudy was a wonderful girl. She just was one of us, Because why would she be? She picked me, you know? And you know, that was a sick girl. And I remember I had a moment of clarity one night just before Thanksgiving, and I remember I had been smoking some cocaine, and I drank all my meth. I had some take-homes by then. They finally let me get some take-homes because I was always coming up dirty. And but this time they gave me some take-homes. And I drank it all. And then I drank a fifth of booze, and nothing happened. You know, and at least I thought nothing happened. But apparently I was in a blackout because they tell me that I went into a liquor store, and it was owned by her uncle. And he was in there, and he said I was walking around saying, "Don't you know who I am? I'm Dallas Taylor. Somebody give me $20." And you know, well, at least I was a highfalutin and grandiosity even at that depth. You know, a quarter? No, give me $20, man. What am I going to get with a quarter? They say I walked out of that liquor store, I threw my wallet, ended up in somebody's car, I threw my keys, I walked back to this shack that I had then been living with, and this shack was like a little shotgun shack, infamous because Squeaky Fromm used to live there. And I want you to know, it had some bad vibes in it. And I walked back to that place, and Trudy was asleep. And I went in and I said, "I'll show you." That's what I was always doing. I'll show you, fuck me. That's my mantra, you know. So I walked into the kitchen, I grabbed a butcher knife out of the drawer, and I stabbed myself in the stomach with it. And the first thing I thought was, I really wish I had done that. It hurt so bad, and it hurt worse coming out. And all I could think of was, you know, I bet a lot of people who jump off the building change their mind halfway down. And then it's like, oh well. And so, you know, by then Trudy woke up and she came in, and I said very dramatically, you know, blood spurting out, you know, and I said to her, "If I'm still alive in the morning, I guess you better take me to the hospital." And she said, "Okay," and went back to bed. And I came to the next day, and it was summer. It was like hot. It was a hot day, and there was no air conditioning, and it was like the flies were around, and the sheets were soaked with blood. And I had a cat named Jack, a big cross-eyed, blue-eyed cat, and he had just stepped on my stomach, and that's how I came to. And I thought, and I looked around, and Trudy wasn't there, and so I made some phone calls, and I finally found her at her grandmother's house, and I said, "I think you better take me to the doctor. I'm not feeling too good." And you know, I had been to my first treatment center in 1972, and that was just to get off the heroin. I had no intention of getting off anything. I had been, you know, I was loaded 2 hours out of that rehab, obviously. And you know, I had been in a couple others that they kicked me out because I was smoking pot in the bathroom. They caught me with a girl or something, you know. And I just didn't get it. And I was coming to meetings. I remember I used to come to the Venice Street meeting, you know, on Lincoln, and I met Buddy Arnold and Nolan Warner and Danny Trejo and all these guys, and they just patted me on the back, and I'd get up and I'd take chips, and I'd explain why I had to be on methadone. It was my medicine, and I needed it. And they just kept telling me, "Just keep coming back, Dallas, you know. You know, I just thank God, you know, you guys love me, because I sure couldn't, you know." And I had nowhere else to go. I had nowhere left to go. And, so finally I ran out of gas. Finally I hit the curb and in 1984. And after I recovered, I was in the hospital for 2 months. I was in detox for over a month. Getting off 10 years of methadone is not fun, you know. And I recommend if anybody decides to relapse, please stay away from methadone, man, because that's poison shit. Well, if you decide to relapse after my story, then you fucking deserve to die. I remember the day they told me they were stopping the detox meds. I panicked. It was the worst day of my life. And then they did it, and I woke up, and I actually got through. I got through it. My legs hurt, but I saw the world in a different way. And I got a glimmer of hope. I thought, hey, maybe I can do this. And I never looked back. I just, I slept through groups, and I'd come to meetings and people would avoid me. They'd walk around me because I was scary looking. I didn't know it. I had this mean look on my face. I was just scared. I'm not a mean guy. In fact, I got my ass kicked a lot. It looked like everything was going to be okay. So, I got a job in recovery, and poor Trudy. I met this therapist, and she bought me a guitar, so I divorced Trudy and married her. And I did it. And, because that's, we get what we want, All I had to do was see her mother's house, and I knew that she was for me. This big old house in Bel Air. And, but I knew it was over with me and Trudy, and I had hurt Trudy so bad so many times that it really was just an excuse and a place to go for me, a place to go because I had nowhere to live. And there was a part of me that just knew that if I got away from Trudy, she'd be okay. And so it really wasn't that cold-blooded. It was really about, I had hurt this girl beyond, I couldn't even look her in the eyes. So I ended up, and I didn't even like this woman that I ended up with. And I ended up with her for 10 years. 5 years later, I'm working in recovery. I'm got it going on, I'm playing music again, but not really getting any gigs. And I couldn't figure out, I'd auditioned for a couple guys that were big fans of mine, I'm this famous guy. I mean, musicians know me. And they'd come up to me. I remember I auditioned for Eddie Money, and he came up to me and said, man, I am one of your biggest fans, but I can't hire you. I don't know what happened to you, but your playing is not what it used to be. So there it goes. There was proof. I knew I needed cocaine to play the drums. So, one night I got really sick. I got a spiking fever of 104, maybe even higher. I started puking blood, and they took me to the hospital and said, well, the good news is that you've stopped bleeding, and the bad news is that, you've damaged your liver beyond repair, and if you don't get a transplant in 6 months, you're probably going to die. Now, I'd forgotten to tell you I'd had multiple doses of hepatitis, every kind of A, B, C, X, Y, Z hepatitis you can get, twice over, the doctors would tell me, I got my first dose from a stewardess, believe it or not. And the doctor said, you can't drink and you can't use drugs. So I cut down on the cocaine and I drank wine. And you guys know this. I know you know this. And so, I knew that, well, then one more time I thought, well, is this guy out to get me or what? Here now I want to live, and they're telling me I'm going to die. And so, thank God I had the fellowship around me. My friends just sat on me because, at 5 years clean, I wanted a big spoon full of heroin and cocaine, and that's how I wanted to go out. And because I didn't want to, I knew what death by liver failure looked like, and it ain't pretty. And I'll be damned, I just that little small voice came to me and said, don't give up before the miracle. And I had said that a million times to newcomers and drooling guys in detox, but after a while it just becomes by rote. I tell people, oh, you're going to die if you go out there, and then when they die, oh my God, they really died, and so I'm working and I'm carrying this beeper that they say, when we find a liver for you, we're going to page you, and you're going to come in and we're going to cut your old liver out and we're going to put you a new one in. And boy, if you really think about that, that's a scary thing. And 6 months to the day, and I remember Don Henley and Crosby, Stills and Nash got together and they put on this big concert. It was like being at my own wake at the Santa Monica Civic. All these people showed up and, oh, we love you, Dallas, and and it was really bizarre because it was like seeing all these people that love me and care about me, but it was like watching it. It was my own wake, and my daughter was there and she was crying. It was horrible. My son, and well, I got my son and my daughter back, and I got the phone call and they told me that an 18-year-old kid was killed on the 405 freeway by a drunk driver. So now I realize that it wasn't God that was out to get me, it was me. And that God was there for me all the time. And he was there for me when the paramedics, all the times I came to and the paramedics were working over me. He was there for me when I was in the neighborhood and somebody shoot at me. He was there for me because I carried a gun, And I got that transplant, and April 17th, it was 13 years since the transplant. And, it's just one more miracle in my life, I am just a walking miracle. Now, mind you, I've shortened my life. I understand and I realize that. I've had 3 angioplasties, and as a result of all the anti-rejection meds, because it's toxic, this God's sense of humor. I have to take a handful of pills every day to stay alive. Thank God I was on methadone for so long because, I remember to take them with me. I remember, And, my kidneys are starting to go south on me, but you know what, man, this is 18 years I shouldn't have had. 18 years I didn't know I was going to get. And there's probably a few more years left in it too, because I think that my story is I'm just that, that's God's way, is to take those of us who, I know that there's, most of the people in this room are the ones that everybody said, don't, watch out, you'll end up like that guy or that girl, and oh, they'll never make it, And I was one of those people, when I checked out of rehab, they just shook their head and said, I give him a week, tops. They were going to kick me out of that last rehab, but the doc, his name was Randall, and they caught me in elevators with girls. They caught me, I was just a mess. And I was hostile and crazy. And this one girl just wouldn't leave me alone, And they were going to kick me out. And he said, we cannot kick this man out. He's going to die if we kick him out. And you know that doctor OD'd on cocaine 3 years later. And my poor wife Trudy was found dead last year from an overdose. And she had been dead for 4 or 5 days in the hot desert. And I can go down a list of friends and loved ones that I've lost as a direct result of this disease. And I know that if you stay clean long enough, you're going to lose friends, and loved ones. But I am so grateful today. I am so grateful that I didn't succeed in killing myself. I'm still sick as hell, man. I'm a crazy. What goes on in here is beyond belief. And thank God I don't have a megaphone stuck to my head. Because, boy, this disease is nuts, It's working on me 24/7. And I know that I still love opiates because I've had the experience during the surgeries, and I'm telling you, when I get it, it's like home. It's like home. It was like, oh yeah, this is what's missing, and I know that in my DNA, and so I've got to be extra vigilant, For me, I think the longer I stay clean, the harder I got to work because, man, sometimes, the aches and the pains and the fear, just for a little relief, sometimes it really sounds good. And thank God I know better, because I'm not that kind of guy that could just use on Sundays. Boy, did I try that for a long time. Just use it on Sunday, I don't know why I picked Sunday, but it seemed like a good idea. So, you guys have really been kind, and I appreciate you showing up and giving me, your laughter and your support. And, I hope everybody in here makes it. This is the lifeboat, and out there it's shark-infested waters, and that's probably the most vivid description I can give it. And the insanity is that we're the kind of people that will jump out of the lifeboat into the shark-infested waters, and that's the insanity of this disease. So if you haven't worked the steps, please work the steps. The answers are in the steps. And obviously this is a sponsor-sponsee lunch, so you've got that part right. You've got to have a sponsor. And and just don't, I just cannot listen to my best ideas. My best ideas are insane, and I cannot go on Dallas will. Dallas will is what I just described. Dallas will take me to places that I just don't want to be. So you guys have a great afternoon, and I really appreciate you inviting me, and God bless, and thanks.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.